Well, a decade now since the housing bubble burst, two housing economies have emerged. Those who can afford to buy and those who can only afford to rent. That's according to a new analysis by the Associated Press. What does this mean for the housing market going forward? Let's bring in Katrina Campins, a real estate expert. Katrina, what's going on here?
Well, while I agree that many Americans are having a very difficult time saving to purchase their first home, I also believe that many Americans just aren't saving. We live in a completely different world nowadays where we're in the selfie generation, so people are buying things they can't afford for validation and to impress others. You know, the average loan, student loan I should say, per month is about $250, and some economists debate that student loans are so high that people can't afford to save to actually purchase a home. But $250 a month is actually not significant enough to most people. I agree that it's probably significant to some who are making about $30,000 a year. That's about 10% of their income, so it is substantial there. But I think people are just failing to save. You know, I think one thing that's important is that we still live in the land of opportunity, and the American dream is very much still alive, but it's what you do with that opportunity.
So what is the situation with rent? People are choosing to rent rather than buy because it's just more affordable?
Well, actually, rent prices have actually gone up substantially because there's so much demand and there's very little supply. So what happened after the housing crisis is that a lot of large companies, companies on Wall Street actually picked up these homes for cents on the dollar and then rented them back to people that many times lost their homes. And so, you know, the debate is, are we living in a society where the rich are getting richer and then the poor are suffering?
I mean, this is a fascinating number. Home ownership has dipped to 63.5%. And that's near a 48-year low. So is just the psychology changing? Is it not, you know, people aren't necessarily getting married, having kids and buying a starter house. They're starting their career first and then buying a house way later, and that's not necessarily going to be a starter home.
And you make such a valid point. That was going to be another point of mine, is people are waiting much longer now to get married and start a family. And many times they're waiting until that occurs to actually, you know, basically purchase a home. So you're seeing a lot of that. People also want flexibility, so they don't necessarily know where they're going to get a job next, and they're renting instead of that. But it depends, because we see different things throughout the country. So the Midwest is actually, the rent prices are not as high as maybe you see in Los Angeles or Texas or Florida and New York. But overall, you know, the American dream is still there. The question now becomes whether Americans want to save enough to be able to purchase their first home.
Hey, Katrina, down in Miami, I know that hedge funds came in and snapped up a lot of properties at the very bottom. Have you seen them sell those properties, which would certainly help the price of real estate for sale down there and bring even more supply on the market?
A lot of them are holding on to them and they're renting them because they bought them so cheap, and interest rates, that's a huge part of this equation. It's, you know, money is so cheap to borrow now that a lot of these large firms are just keeping them as rentals, and the demand is definitely there. Some people think that maybe they'll release some of those and put them on the market, you know, if things change, but right now you're seeing a lot of them really just hold it for the long term.
Katrina, are you seeing a problem with new supply coming from the home building industry? We've heard a lot that regulatory burdens have really soared since the financial crisis. There's land restrictions, there's increased proffers, and I've heard as much as 40% increases in the price of a new house because of all the new regulatory burdens that have come on. Are you seeing that as a big part of the supply problem in the housing market?
I am. I am also seeing that contractors are having a very difficult time finding workers that are experienced and reliable. That's one of the biggest obstacles in the construction industry. And, you know, there's very little incentive now to work for minimum wage. And so people are finding other avenues, finding other, you know, odd-end jobs and so forth. But as far as construction, it's very regional, so it depends on what market you're referring to. We still have builders that are building, but they're being a lot more conservative moving forward.
All right, good stuff, and we'll keep watching it. The housing market. Katrina Campins, good of you to join us today. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
All right.